When I started watching pornography, and more than watching, but leaning on it and being dependent on it, I was in a very precarious situation as a teenager, feeling that I had no one to turn to, all of these problems inside me, and here I had something that can numb them and put them to bed for a little while. And it's not a bad thing. At that point
it filled a need at the time.
It filled a very important need, maybe a life or death need. I don't know what I would have done with those feelings if I didn't have the ability to numb it. But now I'm not 12 years old. And I have tools, resources, abilities that I didn't have then for me to, I'm not in Vietnam anymore.
Right.
And why am I still taking that
You're
drug?
not at war.
So when someone comes to me and they're talking about their addiction, I'm not at war, I like that. When someone comes to me and they're talking about their addiction, and like, I hate my addiction, it's going to be a very tough place to come from. What did your addiction really do for you? And most likely, when it started, it filled a very, very, very useful and important need. And if you can go back into your story, otherwise we wouldn't develop it. Why would we develop it? Why would we allow ourselves to go back there at the beginning stages? We weren't addicted then. Why we go right? The first time we did it, we weren't addicted. It took a little bit for us to get there. What was going on in our life? And it actually we'll almost uniformly find that it made a lot of sense at that time. People talk about genetic, alcoholism is genetic. It's not genetic. There may be some genetic predisposition.
Right.
I've never. The reason I say it's not genetic categorically is because I've never met anyone who's an addict who doesn't have a crazy story. The amount of kids who were sexually abused and became sex addicts, I mean, it's a very high percentage. I'm not saying it's the only way someone can become a sex addict, but it's divorce, trauma, health issues, all sorts of stuff that people deal with, and then they develop an addiction. At that time was necessary. So to be able to say thank you / goodbye, it's so much more compassionate to ourselves, and it works a lot better. And your friend is more likely to leave if you say thank you.
Right.
I was like, dude, I was there when you needed me, and now you're just throwing me out of the house. Like, I know you were there. I'm saying thank you. You're just like, it's time for you to move on and me to move on. So that's the first. And the second letter that I've recommended almost everyone write, right? And I can't say if this extends to people who are not from a firm background, but certainly people from a firm background, is, and I wasn't so formal when I delivered the letter the first time, but it was, I'm extremely upset at you, Hashem. Right? And you can use your own imagination for the way I would have articulated it in a less formal way. The reason I suggest it is because normally there's a ton of anger that we've developed. And I'm not going to say it, it could be that it goes beyond the firm community, but it's certainly for us. And in some ways it could feel like we were set up in some way. So I felt like that, and I've heard this kind of theme in a lot of people's stories, is at the end of the day, if I'm being truthful, this is the thing that saved me. This is what I needed. And then here I am learning these things, how I'm creating a holocaust every time I go in this direction, right? Or all sorts of horrible laws, horrible things that are going to happen to me from porn and masturbation and everything else. So I'm set up. Like, you put me in a circumstance where I had almost no solution other than to do this. I was doing my best in a lot of other ways, and then I'm hearing all of these things that are so terrible. And anger can form towards God. The other thing is that we're told that He's in control of everything, and a lot of us are very unhappy about our life. So what happens is that when we start our day, Baruch atah this, Baruch atah that, it's the, I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, but it sets the foundation for a very
toxic,
very false relationship.
Right.
So oftentimes, write this letter. Not write this letter if that's what you feel. Meaning, if that's what you feel, God is big enough; He can handle it.
Meaning, meaning it's almost like instead of going through the motions, if this is how you feel about something, express it.
Right. And I'm sure I offended someone when I suggest this. Let me explain what I'm saying. What I'm suggesting is that we need to have a real relationship with a God, with a higher power, if we're going to get out of addiction. That's the way it works. The 12 steps is all based on that.
Right.
So people can sugarcoat it, people can dance around it. The 12 steps is based on the fact, if you look at the early letters of Carl Jung, the famous therapist at the time, with Bill Wilson, who was the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, he basically said that there's the types of alcoholics who regular treatment doesn't work for. The types of addicts now can be extended to who regular treatment doesn't work for. And the only people who've seen heal is people who've made a profound spiritual shift in their life, and their life became one where they had a strong personal relationship with a higher power. and now I'm using some of my own words, but there's a strong personal relationship with a higher power, and you feel directed and cared for by this higher power. So I ask you, if someone is feeling angry towards God, but they've been told that they can't even express this anger because God's going to punish them, or it's a Chil Hashem, or all the other languages
That's used.
we use, you don't have a real relationship and you can't get sober. So if that's where you're at now, God is big enough. He can handle it. Moshe yelled at him, so did others. He can handle it. Okay, so that sets the foundation for a real relationship and a real conversation. And some of my journal entries will start addressed to a higher power. And the solution and the real healing comes when we say, oh, wow, there's been a higher power who's been directing me, who's been with me, who's been side by side with me in my darkest times and now in my better times. And that knowledge and that relationship is what pushes us forward and keeps us sober. But we can't do that if we
Don't have a dialogue.
if we're not, we don't have a dialogue, it's not honest. If someone doesn't feel like they can be honest with their higher power, with God, with the only thing they can say is Baruch Atah Hashem, when they're feeling anything but Baruch Atah Hashem, they're not going to get sober. So those are the two letters that I almost always recommend. And very quickly, people are not saying thank you to porn or anything. Thank you. They're saying goodbye.
Right.
They're not saying thank you every day. It's not my relationship today. It's one of closeness and one of feeling that I have a higher power who cares about me, is directing me, and this is my way of giving back and thanking him for what he's done. Thanks for the
Wow.
Thank you
opportunity.
so
Amazing.
much.
Thank you so much.
Really, thank you for coming.